your second unit, guys coming back. You talk about some veterans on the roster. Well, how about guys like Brandon Knight and John Henson, who you just acquired at the deadline this year? Do you re-sign those guys? Do either of them have some value? I mean, they've both contributed during their time so far here in Detroit. And again, contributed to a team that's losing, which is exactly what we want them to do. And in theory, it's kind of what we want them to do next year, to try to position for another solid draft pick. But are we thinking that there's a value to re-signing them, to filling out your roster? Or are we trending in just youth movement? Let's get Jordan Bone up here. Let's get Dante Hall up here. Let's get some other young pieces. We don't need these guys.
I'm not opposed to it, honestly. I think Henson provides some decent value.
And let's say they do. Let's say they trade for Jared Allen and they don't trade for Jared Allen. Does your answer differ?
Honestly, probably not. I mean, John Henson's a backup center, and the Pistons, you know, when John Henson's on the court, they look a little. They don't look like they don't have a center on the court. I would prefer John Henson over re-signing a Thon Maker. Let's put it that way. And that's John Henson's a guy that's not going to take up salary cap. He's a minimum kind of contract guy. And Brandon Knight's kind of in the same boat. He's a guy that can play the 1 or the 2. Now, if you're going into next season with Derrick Rose still on the roster and you draft Killian Hayes or you draft another point guard and you have Bruce Brown and you're going to play him at some point guard.
Are they, though? Because Dwayne Casey's talked about how he's not.
I still don't think. I mean, again, you look at the Sacramento game last night. Bruce Brown handling the basketball and the team goes on a run and comes back. It's like right in front of you that Bruce Brown is a point guard. I have to think that the team is going to realize that at some point and reevaluate that at some point. If you already have 3 point guards on the roster, I'm probably going to say no to Brandon Knight, even though I like him. I like what he's brought to the table. Now, if they move Derrick Rose or they draft Anthony Edwards and they have another guard spot available and they're not going to bring up Jordan Bone, who I didn't even mention, then sure, I guess. But I think when you look at the priority list, Jordan Bone is a much higher priority than Brandon Knight. Jordan Bone needs to be on the main roster next year. I mean, you spent draft compensation to get
him.
Jordan Bone.
Yeah.
You need to give him an opportunity. And you have Bruce Brown, and you can draft a point guard, and you still have Derrick Rose. So I'm not sure there's a huge opportunity for Brandon Knight. But I like what John Henson brings. And another veteran that you can bring in here that the Pistons just brought in was Jordan McRae, who's had 15 points and then 14 points in 2 games with the team. He's been solid, but not a guy that needs to be on this roster next year because, again, you can take young guys. You can take flyers on young guys. McRae is 29 now, I believe. Or maybe he's still 28, turning 29 in a few weeks, whatever it is. But if I had to hold on to one of those guys, it'd be Henson. If I had to hold on to 2 of those guys, it'd be Henson and then Knight.
In agreement with your number 1, I would bring back John Henson. I'd much prefer him on a minimum deal than I want Thon back.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. I have no problem with John Henson on the floor. I actually like John Henson on the floor. For a losing team that needs some sort of veteran presence, I think he provides a great presence for these young guys. He's not, a total just black hole out there. He can produce a little bit. I'm fine with bringing back John Henson on some sort of, veteran. If it's not the minimum, it's closer to a
very
reasonable contract. Deal. I'm fine with that. Aaron, a name you keep not mentioning in draft prospects that I just keep getting hot on again. Denny Advia.
I love him.
I think I've been on the Denny train the whole time. You realize, I'm not opposed to Killian Hayes, but I've never jumped onto Killian because I've been a Denny guy. Ryan, and I'll give Ryan the credit. Ryan's the guy that really brought Denny to the forefront for me, as we talked probably 2 months ago about this.
Maybe even further back than that.
It might have been farther back, yeah. And Ryan brought him to the forefront, and I'm like, gosh, yeah, I mean, you're right. And I'm watching highlights, and I'm just occasionally checking it, not Denny, idea, whatever, just checking it out, and it's I'm still a big fan of that draft pick.
I'm a believer in Denny, but of course it could go a million ways. See, if Jared Allen's on this roster next year and Derrick Rose isn't, do they draft Killian Hayes? Do they not? What are they doing? So at that point, Derrick Rose is not on the roster. Who are the point guards on the roster? Kind of, sort of, Bruce Brown, maybe a little bit, which we agree, he's a point guard, but Dwayne Casey says he's not. So, kind of, sort of, maybe. And then Jordan Bone. You need some sort of veteran presence there, I think, even if you do draft Killian Hayes. So, I'm not opposed to bringing back Brandon Knight.
Because then if you really want to, you could slide Bruce Brown to playing more of the 2 and just let Brandon Knight handle the backup 1 spot. If Derrick Rose is not on the roster, then you bring Jordan Bone up as your third point guard. And you know that somebody's going to get hurt over the course of the year. You're going to have to spread your minutes, and he'll get an opportunity.
And if Derrick Rose is on the roster next year, I don't think you bring him back. Because if you do draft Killian Hayes, you've got Derrick Rose, Killian Hayes, kind of sort of Bruce Brown, and Jordan Bone. And that's what needs to take precedent at that point over Brandon Knight.
Now, who are your backup 2 guards? Because you have Luke starting. Who's your backup 2 guards?
Bruce Brown. And after that...
So does that give you an opportunity to bring back Brandon Knight and just let him play a combo guard role just like Bruce does? Just throwing that out there.
I think a lot of it's dependent on what they do with the draft pick.
It really is.
Because
it really is.
For sure.
Anthony Edwards is a 2.
Right.
Killian Hayes is a 1.
Well, if they draft
probably a 3.
If they draft Anthony Edwards, does that mean Luke Kennard hits the trade block again, like right away?
I don't know. I mean,
do him and do Luke.
Do you need 2 6'5" shooting guards?
That's what I'm saying. If Anthony Edwards was 6'7", and you could play both Luke and Anthony at the same time, or if Luke was 6'7", like it'd be different. But I mean,
we forgot about Svi Mykhailiuk.
And we have Svi. Yeah, that's the other guy who's going to be behind.
He's a backup 2 right now. Is he a
backup 2 right now? Because if you're playing Sekou at the 3 next year with Tony Snell backing him up, or vice versa, and I could totally see Dwayne Casey,
see Tony Snell starting. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's just so you've got Svi, okay, but
if the Pistons were to land that number 1 pick and Anthony Edwards is taken, that very much tells me, or even before that, if they land the number 1 pick, my gut tells me they're going to be shopping Luke Kennard again.
Yeah, or do you shop that number 1 pick to move back to like 3 or 4 and try to acquire something else with it? Do you think Detroit gets gutsy and does that, or do you think they just take who they want at number 1 and solidify their pick?
See, it's hard for me because obviously it's tough to turn down a guy like Anthony Edwards just because of his pure bucket getting abilities. Like, I get that, I see it. The shot making is very special. There is something about Killian Hayes that says he needs to be a Piston, and I like Denny too. Those are Killian's my 1, Denny's my 2 in terms of big board for the Pistons. Mm-hmm. Like I'm just brazenly high on them. If there was a team that said, look, we want Anthony Edwards, so we will give you the third pick or the 4th pick, and we'll throw in so and so. Sure. Sure. Because that means if you get the 3rd pick, you're getting either of Killian or Denny. You're getting one or the other, I mean. And you could get some value. I don't know if that's going to be a thing. I don't know if anyone's high enough on...
I was going to say, how valuable is the number 1 pick this year?
Right. I don't know if anyone's high enough on that. Plus, I feel like there's going to be enough other teams trying to trade their pick anyway.
Unless if there's somebody at 3 that wants Anthony Edwards and knows, like, hey, maybe Detroit's not going to take him, but now I've got to worry about number 2, him going. I need to move up and get him. That's the only way.
It really is. Because this draft class, I think there's going to be some real good players out of it, but nothing strikes you as, I have to have it.
Not on draft day, right? Could this class end up being one of those classes you go back and be like, dang, like they were loaded and they didn't realize how talented this class is? Possible.
I think this class has gotten better, honestly. I think it's definitely trending in the right direction in terms of is it good or bad. I think
agree.
It's definitely trending.
I agree.
That it's a better draft class than what was talked about at the beginning of the year.
It's just at the very top. I mean, is there a mega star that a team would want to go get that number 1 pick for? If you're not completely sold on it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think this draft has a lot of guys, first round level guys. I think the second round is kind of a crapshoot, but good teams find that player. There's always going to be some players in the second round that you can get. Good teams will find them. I think it's going to be a little bit harder this year. I think there's just not as much talent. But
real quick, what I was thinking about as a wild card here into kind of our conversation and what you do with Brandon Knight. Where is Davidas Servidis at the end of it this year?
yeah,
What are the Pistons? I think I'm just for the timeline of if he comes over, he needs to be in the G League to get that experience too. But I mean, honestly, I don't know how he's doing right now. What is he above? Is he ahead of schedule? Is he behind schedule? Is he just kind of on pace?
right.
What's the wild card with that look like?
Yeah.
I'm thinking they didn't draft it. They didn't trade a ton of assets to go get him for nothing. Okay?
Yeah, they have some sort of belief.
There's belief in a plan there. So how does that mess with everything in terms of roster construction and bringing back Brandon Knight?
Yeah. I mean, I think
There's a lot of variables.
I think at the most, Servidis is probably a guy that's in the G League next year at his best, if not overseas again. I like Brandon Knight. Like, I've enjoyed watching him in a Piston uniform again because in my younger days, I enjoyed watching Brandon Knight in his original stint as a Piston. But it's just hard to see a circumstance where there's a need for him on this roster when there actually is going to be a circumstance in which John Henson is worth a roster spot. That's just kind of where I am on that.
I agree. I agree.